Welcome to the Spirit of Business, episode number 55, The Future of Business, with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Matt. I have a topic for this week. I have just come out of running a course that was called Future Human, how to think and act like a future human and move into a win-win-win society. That was the title of it. And so it started me thinking, I'm very deeply engaged actually in thinking about business and the future. What does a future business look like? How do businesses need to change and adapt themselves in order to meet the directions and the trends of the future? And I think this is not only the trends of, what does the market want? What's the latest fad or gadget or something? But what are the bigger trends that are emerging that I think we can see more clearly as a result of a year of COVID as well, where people are beginning to focus more on values. And there are some very big themes with climate change and the bigger challenges facing this planet. Every business, as far as I can see, is actually going to need to ask questions about this, as is every individual. So I thought we should get in on that earlier rather than later.
It's a great topic and one that I'm sure that we could explore for hours in different aspects of it, because it does open up a very broad range of things to discuss. And when you started talking and introducing that topic to me today, where my mind went to is the micro and the macro, because the future of business we're currently grappling with at the moment, just on, if I call it a physical level and a micro level, which is around where do we work? Do we work in the office? Do we work virtually nowadays? It's obviously COVID's taught us a whole lot of good things that have calmed our lives down from running around all over the place, like we've discussed before. So we have to address that, but that's really a micro level. And I think what you're talking about is probably more macro, from the perspective of the bigger picture and talking about bigger issues in our business. And so but they have an impact upon the micro. So micro and macro does actually intertwine, and that's kind of what I think of, because I also have been thinking about the future of business a lot too. I'm reflecting because I have to make decisions about what the future of our business looks like. And so that's something that I've been reflecting upon. And another thing that comes into this too is relationships, is because business is very much about relationships. It's intertwined with relationships. So what does the future of relationships in business look like too? So there's a lot of different angles and topics that we could discuss today.
Well, I think we could
I'm interested in thinking about where you want to sort of to bring this conversation.
Well, I think we could use this one as a kind of kickoff for doing a whole series of podcasts that are more future focused, because a lot of the ones we've done in the past have been very situational. They've been about situations that your business owner colleagues or mine are in, and how do we address those kinds of situations. But it feels to me as though to start to look at the future with those different lenses, so relationships might be a whole topic, and other aspects of business might be a whole topic. So we could take a bit more of a macro look. And there are two things going through my mind at the moment. One is a report you sent me, I think, from McKinsey, probably a year ago, that said something like, and I'm probably going to misquote, but I think I'll get the spirit of it. It said something like, businesses that don't engage with purpose will fail. And somebody was reading to me last night an excerpt from a new book written by the guy who's the former governor of the Bank of England, and I think former governor of the Bank of Canada, something like that. So totally at the top of banking. Now, I haven't read the book, and I don't know if there are what the agendas are behind the book, if there are, but certainly the words he was using, he was saying that the way the markets work at the moment is absolutely unacceptable, and that we have to bring genuine values, human values and human connectedness into business, essentially, that we cannot do business from a purely selfish point of view, and that the way the markets are working at the moment is self-interest only, And obviously that's not 100% true, because there are always examples that go in a different direction, but it basically works on that principle, and it doesn't take account of all the other things that are important in life, which especially include nature, especially include human quality of life, and include the collective experience, so the whole of humanity rather than a part of it. A lot of what we do, it can be beneficial in a kind of micro environment and actually harmful to a larger environment, and that for sure will no longer work. And so if we look from that perspective, then businesses, it's not only that they will have to change, that's kind of like the stick thing. It's not changing in order to survive. It's, to me, it's the fact that business, and especially small business, is the most powerful instrument of change of all. First of all, because we operate from choice, we have freedom of choice. We can choose what we do with our business and what we share with our clients. Far more, I think, than governments can or other institutions. And because small businesses have an incredible agility, they can actually pivot and change and make new decisions extraordinarily easily, much more easily than large corporations can. And business owners, as we constantly point out in this podcast, are the great solution creators. We spend our whole time finding either problems or challenges and solving them. And that's really what all of this is about. We have some really significant problems. We have some really huge challenges, and we need people to solve them. And the people who train themselves every single day in solving problems are business owners and business teams. It's not really the owners, it's the whole business actually that does it. And I think we need to bring the focus more to the entirety of the business, not just the owner.
Which makes a lot of sense. I suppose the question that I pose back to you, if we're talking about the future of business, and we're saying we currently do business today, and you've just cited some examples about things that aren't necessarily working so well in our current business landscape. And I think that we have to be careful not to sort of put it into, generalize and put it into bags around saying, well, things aren't happening. Well, I think there's a lot of good that's going on in the world as well. And there's a lot of good, focuses, and may not necessarily be implementing, but, there's a focus around being social and environmental and having an economic impact and all those sorts of things. So there's at least the conversations are there. Whether we're actually doing it to the right level or not across the board is probably the biggest question.
Well, I think we can definitely say that we're not.
No.
Definitely.
Across the board, not, but there's elements where we are. I think that there's examples
there are always examples, and in every business there will also be good things. But I would say categorically that as individuals and as businesses, we have a lot to do.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Yeah. In your mind, what is the lot to do? What is the thing that we need to be doing more of in our businesses to have a future business that is better than the current business?
I think the heart of it is actually really simple. If I said something like, it would be better if we lived in a world where everybody's thriving, probably not many people would disagree with that, except they might say, oh, that's utopia, or that's... But I think to be moving in the direction toward, or to have a goal that everybody would be thriving, or that people would have the opportunity to thrive. Now, there will always be variation. There will always be people who are sick at the moment, and there will be people with varying levels of ability. But I can't really imagine a healthy human being who could wish on others, I wish you not to thrive. I can't really imagine anyone saying, I don't want nature to thrive. We want nature to be thriving, and we're part of nature. And so to me, that's the fundamental orientation. And the good thing about that is that it makes it really, really easy to start to shift little by little the way you do business. Because the first question you ask is, am I thriving? And if you're not, instead of saying, "Oh well, it's okay, I've just got to get all these things done," you explore, how could I thrive more? Now, I work with people who do a lot of work on thriving, and I think most of them would be honest and say, I could be better at this. So I don't think it matters where we are. This is a directional thing. It's not like we've got to do this. It's like, how can I be more thriving, because I'm going to be better in my business if I'm thriving more. And then we can look at, is the business thriving? Are the people in it thriving? Are we contributing in any way to our clients thriving? Because a business should contribute to the thriving, to the quality of life of its clients. That's what it is. Now, we've had a long history of it being somehow quite okay for businesses to even do things that are known to be harmful to their clients because of market demand or something. And that's always a tricky issue, because we're not here to say what people can and can't do, and people do have freedom. But we can, in our own hearts, say, do I want to make sure that what I'm doing is contributing to thriving on this planet? Or are there elements of it that are actually contributing to some kind of destruction or harm that I really don't want to be adding to? It might be an unexpected, byproduct of my business. Is there something that I can do to make a difference? And the thing is, these are all very, very small things that are doable. You do them over time.
So what you're talking about there is about the well-being of yourself as an individual in business, of the people that you support, which are the team that surround you.
I would say of the people.
Clients.
I would say the people that support you.
Yes, the people that support you.
Support the goal of the business at least.
Yes.
Well. Yeah.
Correct. The people that the organisation assists and support, and it's a two-way street too, in terms of clients or customers.
Yep.
The environment, so you're talking about
the community, the wider community as well.
Yep. So you're talking about it from the perspective of well-being, and I like the term well-being because it means if we're all beings, okay, and we want to be well, so we're well-being, okay, so
and we're being well. It's kind of
being well, and so to do that, you're thinking about it on a larger scale, and you're talking about quality of life, and quality of life is all aspects of life, not just what you're producing inside your business or what you're doing inside your business. It's the impact. And obviously there's a large movement, which you were sort of saying before, around starting to think from a bigger lens. And really that's what I'm hearing from you, is that we've got to think about our businesses and the future of the business from a larger lens, from an expanded lens, around saying, well, what is the impact that you're actually having for your business to the world that will actually have a direct relationship with the well-being of the world communities and yourself, and making sure that there's a nice harmony that exists between that and you individually, because you also need to get the benefit of that and feel good and enjoy, as you say, thriving, running your own business, as well as the impact that it has on the world. Is that, am I getting it right in terms of what I'm saying there?
And there's a couple of things I want to put in, which are the harsh parts of it, but we should not shy away from the harsh parts of it. If you listen to Zach Bush, for example, who is extremely intelligent and highly, highly educated commentator, and there are many different ones. He talks about soil, quality of soil, and soil collapse. And he also talks about the fact that we're already in the middle of the 6th mass extinction on this planet. There have been 5 prior to this. The harsh part of it is that some of the changes that are needed, it's not business as usual. It's not, where we were trundling along, gradually getting a little bit better at, we talk a little bit more about well-being in our office these days. We're talking about major threats, and we know that. So I'm not saying something that anybody doesn't know. We know it because it's on television all the time. Of course, it's not, I think, that it's exaggerated on television. It's badly reported on television most of the time. And occasionally it'll be well reported. And it's very, very difficult to get at the truth because there are many angles on the truth. But I think that we know that when soils are poisoned, for example, and we know that they are, or when soils are producing, as they do in many places, like super weeds that have never been seen before because the soil has been so poisoned. And we know that when our food and products we put on our skin are full of things that are directly harmful. We know this without any question. The science is there. It's all been done. We may feel driven to continue buying those things, and there's all kinds of psychology in there. But I think the point is that this is not a business as usual situation. This is a real call to step up. But what I'm trying to say is that you step up from really easy things that you can do. Like you said, it's yourself, and then of course it's your family and it's the people around you. But it's got to be real and sincere. And that McKinsey article, what was really interesting, it said that every single person in the organization is going to be challenged by this. And it's that challenge that we need to face. It's not like, oh, well, how do we just put in a program, or how do we put in procedures? It's about how do we ask the big questions. How do I ask the question about how can I respond to this call to step up in relation to well-being on our planet? And I really want to say that we should not shy away from this, because it's easy to think, oh my goodness, I've got enough on my plate. I've got to, just running a business is enough, or going to work, whatever it is, that's enough. But from all my research, which is fairly considerable, and my experience, first of all, even if it feels like enough, we're still going to have to think about these things. We still had to think about COVID last year and deal with it, even if you already had enough on your plate. But the other thing is that it's not nearly as scary as you think, because the benefits by far outweigh the challenge. So actually engaging with it brings you so much that you don't get if you don't.
Yeah, and that's what I was about to say when you were talking around the fact that, yes, we've all got a lot to do, because that's just the nature of our lives and business and how it operates. But the work that I do, when you start to connect people into their business and the impact that it's having to people and anyone, including yourself, as soon as you start to make the connection between, whether they're noble goals, which you've spoken about before, whether they're impactful goals, or whatever it actually is, or what the outcome is, or the output of the organization, generally there's a sense of energy, and the energy being positive energy around, people feeling good, and then there being motivation. And when you get positive energy and motivation, you move more into an ability to get things done. So therefore you can do more and more and more, because you've actually got this sense. Okay. And so the starting point, as you say, is very much around saying, okay, you can either go, oh, that's another thing, and I'm fatigued. Okay. That can be the natural response to this conversation. Or it can be, hang on a minute, I've got an opportunity to actually do something really grand. And I like the word grand, and big and noble. And when I start to talk like that to business owners in the work that I do, you just see this beautiful switch that occurs, this moment where people just get that. It's almost like they get this massive injection of energy and a good feeling, which kicks them into gear, that pushes away the fatigue, that gets them onto a track. And that track just changes, and nothing significant changes, other than the fact that something significant changes, which is a different lens. And that's probably the feeling or the sense that I get, is that it's a lens. that we're currently doing business at this lens and these lenses and this way and this perspective, what we're really saying, or what I get a sense of, is moving that up into a higher lens, okay, and thinking more expanded and thinking, the more impact and the noble and the grand, which feels so much better to think about than getting stuck down in the day-to-day sort of, okay, I'm doing this because of, whatever particular reason that doesn't feel uplifting. Whereas this next level that we're talking about, that you're talking about, the future of business and what we're solving for, feels so much better and gives so much more motivation for people to make things happen and not feel like it's too big for them or grand or overwhelming, because they're still operating their businesses, but just probably from a different perspective.
Which means that they take different actions and do different things and get different outcomes. That's the beauty of it, is that tiny change of perspective has such a big consequence, and it's such a positive consequence. So for me, a lot of this is about really having the courage to do that expansive thinking and to do more of it. So sometimes what we can do is, it's like, oh, well, I've already done some of that. And then we get caught up again in the daily, and the selfish. Actually, what happens is we get more and more caught up in me and myself, and it kind of becomes very self-centered. We don't realize that because we're still trying to solve all these problems. And what you described there is, you take people out of that self-centered, just literally myself and my tiny world center, into a much bigger center. And the point is, it solves those problems that you have at that. The more selfish problems actually disappear when you start to engage at that bigger level. And this is not saying everyone's got to run a global business. Like, we've had a lot of that in marketing and stuff. It's not about that. It's about how you think and how you feel, and about not avoiding those hard things that you don't really want to look at, because when you look at them, they summon up that purpose and that spirit and that expanded thinking that makes you feel good and gives you energy and enables you to have more impact and will help you to make better decisions and therefore have a better business.
Exactly. And just when you mentioned about the fact that if you focus on these other things, some of the problems that you currently feel like you're facing right now will go away. And sometimes they go away because you don't give them energy and attention. And I use this analogy about fire, that if you fuel oxygen onto fire, it obviously builds the fire. If you starve of it oxygen, then typically it will start to reduce and go out eventually. And I find that if I spend too much time as a business owner on the negative, annoying problems that go on in our business, they typically will, it's like putting oxygen on a fire, and it actually expands. And whereas if I'm focused on doing all these other bigger, better things, then typically it's not like that I'm ignoring the problems or that they're, but they just naturally solve themselves, and you can apply a small amount of energy to that to solve them, so you can spend more time over here. But if we don't push ourselves into these better spaces, then we typically spend too much time in the other spaces that don't feel great. Okay. So, and I was even assessing my time as a business owner, and as the leader of the organization. And there's probably three categories of things that I do on my business. And one of the categories I don't love compared to the other two categories. And so my goal was to spend more time in the other two categories compared to the one that I don't love. Now, that's not to say that I'm going to be irresponsible and not still give it a sufficient attention, but that's the point. Limit the amount of attention you give to this particular area, because it's probably not necessarily going to serve the business well compared to spending time in the other two categories. So the more that you can start to assess the time and the lenses that you're putting on things and the activity and the energy that you're giving to things in your organization, and replacing the stuff that you know is not so good with the stuff that we're talking about here will actually naturally solve many of the things that we don't love about a business and traject the business into this better space that you're talking about. That's sort of the feeling that I've been getting this on a, like, as you say, you know, it feels like it's too big, but really I just changed the way I thought about my business, what I do inside the business in my day, which is actually going to do a better job for the things that you're talking about and project us into a better business future.
Yeah, and it will start to lead us to ask different questions. So we start to then ask the questions about, well, what kind of relationships create well-being? I heard a story the other day of somebody who yelled at somebody else in his business, and now and he's the boss, he's the owner, and she is not. And now she's not answering phone calls. And it's like, okay, what kind of relationships do we need to have? Now, that might not be a typical situation, but I suspect it happens quite often in businesses. How do we not only behave better? That's the first stage. We can all behave better. We know that in our personal relationships and in our business relationships. But how would we go beyond that? How would we organize ourselves if we wanted to make sure that this is a world where we're all experiencing well-being as best we can? And is the way that I organize things at the moment optimizing that or not? Now, that's not an answer that you'll have a question to. And that's not a question that you'll have an answer to right away. That's something you might need to think about for 3 months or 6 months. Like, I'm a big believer in percolation for these kinds of things. Like, talk about it, reflect on it, look at it, listen to people, get a feeling about it, and then gradually find a better way that might work or might not work. So you have to experiment with it. But the biggest thing, especially when we're talking about relationships, is that it's a multi-way street, and we all change together. So when I change, you change, and there's so many dynamics in it, so that it becomes something it's not like a quick fix solution. It's an ongoing, emerging solution. And I think that we're going to have to really grasp and grapple with this sense of things emerging. I think we're going to need to do a lot of new things in the coming years. And so we're going to need to work with emerging ideas, emerging changes and transitions and transformations, ways of doing things that we've never practiced before, because we find that the way we used to do it isn't working anymore. I hear that more and more often from businesses. Things that have always worked for them don't work anymore. So what I find is that it's really important to be able to handle the uncertainty and the kind of edginess of that, which is quite a big change.
It is a big change. And when you talk like that, it feels enormous. And that's where the overwhelm comes in. And that's why we have to be very conscious that, as you say, we're not trying to turn all our businesses into global organizations, all of us. Some naturally will go that particular way, but it's about what we can do. And the word that was really pertinent that you spoke about too is relationships. If I think about business, I just think it's just an environment where a whole lot of relationships can occur. Okay. And, we have relationships in all aspects when we are in business. And I think that if we can work, as you say, work on the relationships that we have, that will also be another natural starting point for better businesses and better environments and better communities and that sort of type thing, because people are actually enjoying and thriving more, as you say, because the relationships are more uplifting than what you just explained before in that situation where you had someone yelling at somebody else. That's not an uplifting, thriving relationship. It's an oppressive relationship. And so if it's only small little things like, assessing, questioning, as you say, because this is just about questioning a lot, okay? Questioning the relationships you've got, questioning the impact that you're having. and just constantly those sorts of things are going to help us work out how do we make the changes to say, well, what does a thriving future business look like, coming down to the simplest levels about what impact are we having and what relationships are we having with people.
Yeah, because this is not going to be a thing where you can just go out and buy the formula. You might be able to get somebody to help you. I know a few people who work with businesses to help them look at these kinds of questions, but they're never going to walk into a business and say, well, this is what you've got to do. You just do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, because they know that the whole point of this kind of shift is that everyone needs to feel engaged. So everyone needs to feel, this is my change. This is my transformation. And you can't do that just on a formula. You actually have to have personal experiences as well. And it can feel big if you think about it too much. But that's why I think it's so important to keep emphasizing that this is actually really small things that just change on a day-to-day basis. But there is discomfort involved in it. Whenever I start to question something, I start to feel really uncomfortable about it. Of course, because I'm questioning it. I'm thinking maybe that's not as good as it could be. Maybe I could do that better. And I may go through a few months of feeling really uncomfortable about a particular aspect of the way that I'm doing things, especially in relation to new ways that I don't really know yet. So it's not like, oh, I'm just going to swap this marketing system for that marketing system. It's like the way I respond to people. It feels to me maybe like I'm not as respectful as I'd like to be. So how can I become more respectful? I can't adopt that it's like, oh, I got it now, just found the right word. I've actually got to get better at being more respectful. That's a worthy human endeavor, for sure. But it's not difficult and it's not easy. It's just something to be done.
And when you were talking before about that, I think questions make you feel uncomfortable. Two reasons for that is that you're questioning where you're at this particular point in time and the what's going on. And as you say, that's uncomfortable to assess your own performance or your business or where you're at. But the other thing that's really uncomfortable is when you don't know the answer to something. When you ask a question and you don't know the answer, that's really quite uncomfortable because you've got to then search for the answer to things. And that's what stops us from questioning, because one, we don't want to feel uncomfortable because you can see the fallibility of who we are as individuals. And then secondly, you're asking a question you may not know the answer to, which is not cool, which is not great for us either. And
especially business owners who like to have the answer to everything immediately.
Exactly. And so that's why there's a level of uncomfortability, and but then there's also comes with that a level of discipline, because we know that we've got to keep asking the question, okay, because that's the right thing to do, and it'll get us to the right, closer to the right answer, and in terms of where we want to get to. But if we avoid it because it's uncomfortable, then the discipline is that we've got to keep asking the question and keep holding ourselves to account on that. So you talk about, there's no formula, okay? I agree there's no formula, but there is a formula around our actions about how we actually go about this. So more about the how than about the outcome to this. And that's what I think is my big takeaway from this conversation, is the discipline of asking the questions and showing up to try and continually answer them.
Don't settle for a bad answer. I would put that into the discipline. If you find an answer, or someone else says, oh, this is what I did, or this is how you do it, and it doesn't feel right and it doesn't feel good, don't settle for it. Keep asking. Stay in the uncomfortable and keep asking. It's so tempting to just say, okay, I'll just take that one. And then you waste another 3 months or 6 months or a year trying to do something that you knew from the very beginning was never going to work. So,
and we had a classic example of that in your business when we were having a conversation this week about we looked at two examples of things that were working really well in other people's organizations. And you're saying, well, I could go that path or I could go that path because that's proven. But I could just feel that none of those two solutions were right for you. And you could feel that they weren't right for you as well. You needed to find your own path and your own solution, which is going to have a better outcome. I could see that specifically.
Yeah, and I've been asking a lot of questions since that conversation, like really playing it through and trying to look clearly to see that I'm not deluding myself, because I know how easy it is also just to delude myself, like, oh, well, I'll just do what I feel like doing, but maybe it won't work very well, and that wouldn't be satisfying either. So I'm actually right in that questioning and uncomfortable about some of those direction questions in the business. But you know what I think that we could conclude from this conversation is that perhaps the most important characteristic of a future business is the willingness to ask these kind of questions. So to ask questions around the hard stuff, so we don't put it in the too hard basket. To ask questions around the big stuff, so we don't put in the oh, well, that's too big for me, or I've just got to handle my daily challenges. And we don't avoid the questions that are confronting because it's maybe about people, or maybe it's about the way you behave or the way you think. So it's very personal. So first of all, we're willing to engage in these quite challenging questions where we don't know the answers. I think that if businesses, not only business owners, but businesses are willing to do that, we could solve just about any problem on this planet. As long as we can then, when we get answers, we're willing to take action. That would be the other thing. We do need to be willing to take action and fail as well as succeed, those kinds of things that are always a part of business. But that questioning piece seems to me to be essential. I cannot imagine being an effective and successful business in the future without that ability.
I think you've articulated perfectly exactly what we have to do to ensure that a future business turns up that is going to have significant impact and great impact for the world.
Yeah, and that just starts from here with me and you.
Well, it's been another great chat. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you for listening to The Spirit of Business with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum. We'll be back next week with another episode. You'll find the show notes with links and other useful information on our website, spiritofbusiness.live. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends.